You're listening to Transformation at Work, your one-stop guide to Salesforce success. And this is Salesforce Tech Talks, comprehensive deep dives into the art of solutioning and implementation for Salesforce. Our expert squad of developers, solution architects, and industry veterans are breaking open the black box and digging into the possibilities of solution design and architecture. The show is brought to you by Gerent, a summit-level Salesforce consulting and implementation partner and solutions provider, and I am Jeff Stormer, your host as always. Today, we're talking about pricing and manufacturing. Now, pricing should be a fairly straightforward proposition. I buy something for $2, I sell it to you for $5, you get a product, I take the profit. About as simple as it can get. But if you work in manufacturing, you probably know that managing pricing is never really that simple. A more accurate picture would be, I buy a thing for $2 and I list it for $5, but you're a gold tier preferred customer because you've bought with us in the past, so I can actually lower that price to you for about $450. Also, you're buying about 1,000 units, so I can wholesale discount that down to about $375. And technically, we have a deal with a distributor on the East Coast that should bump this down to about $350. But your office is actually on the West Coast, even though you do have locations on the East Coast, so I'd have to check with management if that one still applies. And I'm being handed a note that says there's a boat stuck in a canal, so really we're actually paying $6 for this product, so I know that we agreed upon a price, but we kind of have to go back to square one. Multiply that process by about 1,000 interactions per manufacturer, and you can see why this process is a real pain point. Look, pricing is both an inevitability of running a business and also a noticeable roadblock for sales teams who are just trying to close a deal, for fulfillment and delivery teams who are trying to get product to a customer, and for the customer who is just trying to trade money for goods and services. It is a long, frustrating process made even more complicated when done manually through Post-it notes and Excel spreadsheets. Which brings us to the core question. How can digital tools help manufacturers sidestep all of this busy work and focus on what matters, getting customers the best price for their product as quickly as possible? Discussing this question are Anandhi Narayanan, Gerent's Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Transformation within Manufacturing, Automotive, and Energy, and Ryan Bjorgaard, Gerent's Industry Product Lead for Manufacturing, Distribution, Auto, and Energy. Both Anandhi and Ryan bring a tremendous amount of insight and expertise to this conversation. Anandhi with over 17 years of manufacturing experience, overseeing digitalization efforts and coming to understand the ways that people and technology interact. And Ryan bringing years of in-depth, focused Salesforce product experience and a real passion for solutioning, technology, and digital architecture. We begin our conversation by breaking down a few of the factors that make pricing so complicated within the world of manufacturing and how Salesforce can help simplify that process from beginning to end. Let's throw it over to Ryan.
The value of Salesforce, and specifically manufacturing and Salesforce Industry Clouds, is this ability to bring the operational side and the commercial side together in the context that the commercial team needs that data. So let me flesh that out for you just a little bit. There's a lot of things that go into developing a price. There could be different prices, there could be different costs associated with the things you need to make that specific thing. Pricing could vary by the customer you're selling into, how big they are, where they're located, what kind of products they're buying, and in what quantities. A whole bunch of things go into setting up that specific price. It could be project-specific pricing as well. A lot of those more operational things, different folks are working to develop what those should be, how we can control those values to preserve our margin, and how they all fit together to give a price to a specific customer in a specific situation. But for someone on our commercial team, all they really need to know in the context of working on an opportunity or developing a quote is what's the price I can get to this customer in the context I'm working on it right now, this opportunity or this quote. You don't want to have them going back to ask people all the different scenarios that could possibly happen, having to calculate each time and evaluate all those data points to come up with a price. And so what Salesforce does is bring those two worlds together and serves up the data to the commercial guy in the context that he needs it.
What makes pricing complicated is that it's not fixed to one value. You always have the concept of a catalog or a list price or a price that you set for your organization for the product or services you're providing. And then you have all the concessions that you want to give to a customer for a particular deal. And those concessions can vary. I can have concessions that vary by time. I can have concessions that vary by volume. Like if you buy 100 of my socks, you get it for $10 a sock. But if you're going to be buying 500 of my socks, you get it for $8.50 a sock, right? So there's these types of concessions that we can make. And so how you choose to structure the rules of the concessions you want to make is what makes pricing so complicated, because it's not just a one set of rules for everybody. And it's not even just a one set of rules for all products I sell. It's a whole bunch of rules that I might want to apply in sort of a logical manner. It's why these companies use things like Excel spreadsheets to do a lot of this, because that is fluid, right? That is nimble. I can do whatever I want in a spreadsheet. I can just enter a value. And then once you get that commitment, you execute it in a system like an ERP to execute the price. But the creation of it, napkins are good for that. Post-it notes are great. Like anything where I'm pretty much unshackled.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And like I've worked with a customer in the past, and they would do things like release a pricing sheet every quarter, PDF sheet. Every rep would print out the sheet and post it by their desk. And when they needed a price, they would, two fingers, find the square, that's the price kind of thing, and type that into their quote. So you can imagine what happens if a price changes or a cost changes, let's say. That's going to force us to change our price because the margin's different with the cost increase to us, right? Or what's going to happen in that company is pricing team's going to have to evaluate the impact of that cost, make the necessary pricing adjustments, send out a memo to all the sales reps in PDF form. All the reps are going to have to print it out and then replace the sheet that's pasted by their desk with this other sheet that's pasted by their desk. And by the time that process is complete, all the deals that have been completed on the old pricing schema have already gone through, and you've taken the hit on all of those deals.
It's really a spaghetti, right? Like one little change here has a cascading impact on, could be 500 to 1,000 agreements in the marketplace. Which ones do I have to interrogate? Which ones do I not? And if they were all done in someone's napkin or personal spreadsheet that they were just kind of running off the side of their desk, that's a lot of updates and a lot of going back to like, what were the mechanics or the math that I applied to get here? And how can I shift them? And is it okay?
And so that what Salesforce is trying to do is close that kind of gap between price development and price execution.
Now, as Anandhi and Ryan have discussed, pricing in manufacturing is already an extremely complicated proposition. But speaking of changing prices, you can only imagine how much more complicated that entire process becomes when even that initial cost, the amount that you pay for that product, becomes a very volatile number because of supply chain disruptions. Let's throw it back to Anandhi.
This is where it actually becomes really complicated. So there is the fact that under some condition, I can change the sell price to you. Maybe there's a variable of time, maybe there's a variable of volume, maybe there's a variable about this is associated to a specific project and therefore a specific use case, whatever it might be. So there's a whole bunch of math or logic that usually these companies apply to the request that then decides what sort of discounting I'm going to enable to give my customer. But that discounting is going to be set then off of a list price. So the list price was $5, but in this situation, I'm willing to give it to you for $4, for example. But that $5 of a list price was set based on the fact that my cost was $3. And so 3 plus 2 was going to give me my 5. But that 3 now is changing. That 3 is turned into 4. That 3 is turned into 8. How much is that 5 fluctuating? Is it fixed? Are we always like some percentage above cost is how we set list? Or is this a human sort of intervening and deciding arbitrarily to some degree with some art and some science? So if you go to the end in mind and say, well, I created a discounting strategy for a customer under a unique situation, and now the actual cost keeps shifting on me, then if it shifts, every piece of math I apply to get to that price to that customer also shifts. And every time that math isn't documented or codified, what do I mean by that? Like if it's not like a percentage that I applied to a cell that says take 20% off something or add 30% to something. Every time it's not documented and it's done in sort of a individualistic, somewhat arbitrary manner, then it's hard to actually quickly adjust because that number might change. And then how do I adjust any of the cascading numbers? I don't know where they're going to go up. I don't know where they're going to go down. And if they do change, which is what happened in COVID, all the prices went up. So now I have to start to figure out the impact all the way through on all of those parameters. And the easiest way would be to pass through everything, right? Which we see, I think, in the gas stations. We feel like as consumers, we're just passed through all the price increases and that hurts us. But if we weren't past all those price increases, then someone is basically taking a margin hit along the way, right? I might have been earning 30% margin on this business, but I'm willing to do it for 20%, or I'm willing to do it for 5%, right? That's the only way. If I want to fix a price and if this thing is going up, then basically something is coming down. And I have to figure out at what point is the profitability unprofitable. Does that make sense? That's what makes this so hard. And that's why if you don't digitize something like this, it takes a long time for companies to keep up with the mechanics and figuring out, can I adjust the price? Can my customer consume the new price adjustment? Can they not consume it? And how do I sort of work back that plan for them for every single agreement that's in the marketplace? And manufacturers and distributors, the problem is they have every possible agreement in the marketplace. There are so many pricing agreements out there for their customers as they're securing to win business in every single situation.
Now that brings us nicely to the topic of Salesforce, and specifically the question of how can Salesforce help sales teams get the best pricing information to their customers, even when that pricing information may be changing rapidly on the back end. Here's what Ryan had to say.
First thing I've seen is the ability to control or get a read on changing costs. So this happens a lot with companies who are involved with kind of commodity-based products. Specialty chemicals, a lot of that kind of thing, right? So where your costs are fluctuating all the time, right? Daily, could be hourly for some of these things. How can we get a read on that situation and update our pricing effectively to maintain control over our margins? So that I've seen a lot, and component-based kind of manufacturing as well. We're bringing in pieces that we need to make our thing from somebody else. Being able to say the cost of that thing is changing, so the cost of my thing has to change as well, and being able to connect those kind of things. On the commodity-based side, what I've seen a lot of is being able to say, the cost has changed, how has my price changed? Or how does my price need to change? What's affected by that change? One piece of it changes, right? The impact to my margin is X. You can calculate that on platform. The costing data can be brought into Salesforce from an external system, or what is fairly common in some scenarios, especially like I was saying, commodity-based scenarios, is to have an external web service that provides updated commodity data and to plug in to that, bring that data into Salesforce and say now real time or near real time, right? Costing data has changed. Salesforce side calculation tells me what the impact of that is on my margins and where my pricing maybe needs to change. So it's about getting information, right, as quickly as we can, seeing what the impact of that data is on our pricing, and then being able to make recommendations around. The second part of that is when I change my pricing, how does that affect the pricing I'm offering to my customer? And so what's going to be really important here is that when we update our pricing in Salesforce, we create some visualization, some reporting that our reps can use to say, okay, our pricing changed. What's the impact of that to all of the deals I've got going on with my customers? So existing contracts, existing sales agreements, existing in-flight opportunities and in-flight quotes. What's the impact of that pricing change? Does the price that we're working with still apply? Our reps need to have the data to make decisions like, do I pass that price through to the customer? We need to serve up that data, right, to our reps. And that's kind of where Salesforce really shines, right? Keeping everything in one platform is going to say, thing changes. What's the impact of that serve it all up on one kind of screen and say, okay, here's the price, here's the change, here's the impact, and here's the ability to kind of make a decision, pass it through or don't pass it through kind of thing. And then if it's a scenario where we're passing it through, to automate sending out notifications so we get ahead of that customer experience, right? There's nothing worse than having a price change, changing it on the customer, telling them late, maybe after they've already been invoiced. If we need to make a change to a price we promised the customer, we want to be in control of the messaging there. We want to have the data to make our decision. We want to be able to communicate that out to the customer as quickly as we can to avoid those kind of scenarios. Exactly.
Now, by augmenting existing technologies and processes with Salesforce, teams can account for changing prices on the back end and equip sales teams with the information that they need to deliver accurate, upfront pricing costs to their customers. Here's Anandhi with an example of how that breaks down.
All companies ultimately will digitize the actual pricing rules in their ERP. All these manufacturers and distributors will, because that's where it's ultimately transacted, right? A customer places an order, says, I get this for $5.42, and you compare it to what's in your ERP. And yes, you can, if it's a match, you can execute that order and fulfill it to the customer's desire. So the execution of those rules are in an ERP. But the mechanics of creating those rules is really the function of a person in a commercial role. I'm going to say sales. It could be inside sales. It could be outside sales, but someone who's really commercially responsible for the relationship with the customer. And that part, most companies haven't digitized. That's the part they're doing in Excel. They're doing in, their own personal sort of notebooks. It could be a company-driven Excel with some macros if they're a little bit more sophisticated, or maybe a homegrown tool of some form. But they're basically using something to create to then just feed into an ERP for execution. But then something changes. And if that something changes, how do I present to you as the commercial person what's changed and what decision do you want to take on that change? Do you want to accept the change? Do you want to not accept the change and therefore probably deal with a margin impact to your organization? And if there's a margin impact to my organization, does my boss now have to approve this? Because anything lower than, let's say, 15% margin, I'm not authorized to allow. So those pieces are typically undigitized. And now you're relying on humans to create those working models, let's call it, figure out the right working model, then remember to let their boss know that they need to approve something. Have that approval done in an email, return that spreadsheet to give it to somebody to go then manually enter it into an ERP system. Very long cycle. And that's the part of what we're talking about. Well, how do we digitize that portion so that it's much more flexible, supportive of salespeople whose jobs are not just to handle these pricing mechanisms. They're out there hunting new deals. They're garnering new relationships, exploring new logos, expanding their base. They've got so many other things they have to do. How do I make this easy to facilitate their ability to evaluate, review, decide, and then implement those decisions and then execute that through an ERP?
What we need to do is make sure that the person, so the sales rep who's developing that pricing contract with the customer, has access to the data they need to return a price for that customer with an acceptable range that they're able to offer. So lots of times companies will have different rules that apply in different situations. If you're buying this product, if your company is located in this region, right? If it's for this specific project, how do those things kind of all fit together? How does that logic apply when those rules kind of are stacked together? If you're in this region and you're buying this product for this project, how do those kind of rules all kind of stack together and evaluate to give you a specific price? And what's the flexibility within the price you're given in that negotiation? Can you go 5% more, 5% less, depending on your discretion? So what Salesforce can do is let you basically decouple some of these layers, right? So that you're maintaining your rules in one place. You're maintaining the logic to apply those rules in one place. And then you're maintaining your engagement layer. So your rep actually working on an opportunity or quote in one place. And what Salesforce does, especially with the Salesforce Industries Cloud, is lets you connect all of those data points and surface the right data in context. So I'm working on an opportunity. I add a product. I add some quantity to that product. I have in the opportunity context all the data that the rules need to make a decision on pricing. So I feed the data back to the business rules engine in Salesforce. I get a price or a range of prices back on my opportunity in near real time. Now I can make a decision. I've got all the data I need. I know for this specific scenario, without having to do any book work, email anyone, call anyone, what I can offer based on what the company's rules are for this customer, for this product, in this quantity, in their specific context. Now, if I need to go outside, so that's one point, right? Applying the rules quickly and in context. The second thing would be getting approvals if I need to go outside of that range, expediting that, right? Because that can be a real pain. If there's a specific scenario where, and this happens all the time, right? There's this one specific scenario where we need to make an exception to this one rule. And the system has to allow for that, right? We can't be bound by our systems. Our systems are there to support the work we're doing, right? Not to box us in to the scenario and be inflexible. So what Salesforce can do now is let the rep enter an exception to that rule and expedite the approval process all on platform to get that done. So send it to the right person for approval, record approvals, record changes that need to be made, feedback from your manager, get that approved and get it out to the customer, all in one platform without having to go to different places or read your emails, go back to different people, look for pieces of paper.
It's really allowing them to get the salespeople to do what they do best, right? They're the negotiators. They know how to find that sweet spot. That's what they're amazing at. Let them do that. If I can serve up the information for them so that they're focusing their time exactly on what they're good at, as opposed to like getting them to do the busy work, the administratively heavy lifting work that they're not great at, probably will resist, might procrastinate, and then have no time to actually do the part that they love doing. Because it took me forever to get this data together. Now I have to negotiate with you, I don't have time to negotiate with you. But even though that's the thing I'm actually pretty strong at doing, and that's the part I love to do.
And when all the pieces are put together and thoughtfully deployed by a trusted technology partner, pretty amazing things can happen, as Ryan breaks down here.
So ideal scenario, we've done our implementation, right? Because we've developed all the different layers that go into getting your price. They're all developed independently and decoupled. And we've created an analytics layer on top of all of our operational layer. I'm a rep developing an opportunity, right? I'm developing an opportunity. I add a product. I give some quantity to the product. The system's going to go figure out which rules apply in my specific context, and it's going to return me back a pricing suggestion and an acceptable kind of range of margin. If I'm good with that, I'll put in what I think I can get. If I've developed my analytics layer, maybe I'm even leveraging historic data in these specific situations to say, this is what I think I can get from this customer in this particular scenario. And I'm using that to put a price in. If I have a reason to put in a price outside of that range, I'm putting it in. I'm able to streamline that approval. It's going to go to my manager. It's going to figure out who needs to approve. It's going to send it to them, approve, get it back to me. And it's going to let me communicate that out to the customer, all as seamlessly as possible. And then because I'm building all of this on the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, all of these interactions that I'm doing, all of this data I'm creating by developing a price in this context is going to feed back into that analytics layer. And so the next time I do this in this particular scenario, it's one more data point that's going to suggest to me, help me say, this is the price that I think works. So that's kind of the kind of art of the possible, right? The ideal, if you've developed everything along the lines that we've been talking about here, what it could look like for you, as opposed to the stuff we've been talking about, right? Go look at a piece of paper, go find the sticky note, go find that email about the pricing changes.
But yeah, I think this is a huge opportunity for so many manufacturers and distributors to really rethink transformation, because I think then you let people do the things that they're great at and avoid the mind-numbing work, so to speak.
At the end of the day, nobody gets into sales to do busy work. And as convenient as Post-it notes and printed out sheets and Excel spreadsheets can be, when discussing something as complicated and often volatile as pricing and manufacturing, what they do is create more of that exact same busy work. What digital technology such as Salesforce really excels at is taking those administrative burdens off the table and allows sales teams to bring their interactions back to something simpler. I sell, you buy, we grow the business, and that sounds a lot nicer and simpler to me. This has been Transformation at Work. Thank you again for listening, and thank you to Anandhi and Ryan for your incredible insights on this episode. Transformation at Work is, as always, produced by Gerent in collaboration with Salesforce. I am Jeff Stormer, your host and producer as always. If you enjoyed the show, consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify, sharing the show with your followers on LinkedIn, or signing up for email updates at gerent.com so you can get alerted whenever we drop a new episode. Once again, thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again soon.